Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Staci, and today we are talking about two remakes, reboots, somethings that both involve pretty much all female casts, and that is Ocean's 8 and the 2016 Ghostbusters film. So the first film, Ocean's 8, recently came out when I'm recording this, maybe not when you were listening to this, and it is again, this is where I'm not sure. It's not a remake, and it's not quite, maybe it's kind of a reboot, but Sandra Bullock's character is actually supposed to be related to George Clooney's characters, so that's an unusual thing for a reboot. Reboots kind of are like, let's wipe the slate clean and do it a different way. But this one is like, hey, yes, I remember that whole series. This is side movie going on or something. It seems to definitely take place after the other Ocean's films. So again, it's not even a side. It's a new book following a different character. I'm still confused. But it has pretty much an all-female cast. It's not like the women, though. There are actual men in the film playing characters. You do see men. They're just not in the main cast. They're not part of the crew that Sandra Bullock puts together to do this heist. And she actually says an interesting line in the film to explain that when she and Cate Blanchett's character Lou are sitting down and planning who they want to get to go in on this heist with them. They for some odd reason seem to have like headshots of these people, but Lou is bringing up different people and Sandra Bullock saying no. And Lou asks, well, why is that? And she's like, well, it's a him. And she's like, what does that mean? He's a him. What's a him? And Sandra Bullock says, a him gets noticed, a her gets ignored. For once in our lives, we want to be ignored. And I thought that was an interesting concept to take about it and an interesting way to explain why we're going to do this with all women. Because you did see, for the most part in the Ocean's film, the crews were all men. There was the whole whatever with Julia Roberts' character in Ocean's 12, but I'm not a big fan of that film, and most people don't seem to be either, because I almost never see it on TV, where I do see Ocean's 11 and a lot of times Ocean's 13 on TV much more often. So Ocean's crew, Danny Ocean's crew, all men. Debbie Ocean's crew, his sister, all women. But unlike Danny's crew, where it seemed that pretty much everybody except for Yen, the Asian acrobat, seems to have somewhat of a history with cons, Debbie's crew seems very unused to cons. She gets out of prison and she goes to see Cate Blanchett's character Lou, and they clearly have a history, so they've worked together on cons before. But as you go through and meet the characters that she's asking to come in on this job with her, you know, Helena Bonham Carter is a fashion designer. Rihanna is a hacker, but it's not clear if she's clearly doing legal things, but it's not clear if she's doing them just because she technically can and likes the thrill of hacking into things through technology, if she's doing it for financial gain or what. She kind of keeps a lot of her info about her secret to the point where she won't even tell Debbie and the crew her name. She goes by the name of Nineball. You also meet Tammy, who does have a history, a legal history, and that's how Debbie knows her. Mindy Kaling plays a jeweler who somehow knows Debbie, though it's not explained why, does know Debbie, does know about her brother, does know what she does, but doesn't seem to have a legal history herself. Awkwafina plays a card hustler, if that's the right term. She's supposed to be a bit like, I think, Linus's character from the first film. She's good at tricking things with her hands and grabbing things without you noticing, that sort of thing. But for the most part, beyond Hammy and maybe Awkwafina's character, am I forgetting someone? Now I have to run that, always with the numbers in the Ocean's movies. So many, but thankfully 8, less than 13. But beyond that, a lot of the people in this seems, if not their first con, their first really big one. And when you actually get into Debbie's backstory, even though she's evidently been planning this huge, huge heist for 5 years, and she gives the explanation that it's what she's good at, when we get the backstory, it doesn't seem that she's actually done it that much. She gives a backstory of when she and Lou were sort of running small cons, and then she met a guy and then ended up going into prison for a con she was doing with him, but it doesn't seem like anything really big in the middle. Whereas with Danny Ocean, when we first met him, because everyone else he was meeting had a history of cons, it seems, with him, and they keep referring to things in that, like when he and Rusty go to see Ruben, he's like, I owe you for that thing in that place, and I'll never forget it. And they're like, oh no, so you get these like sort of hints that we're not even going to explain of things in the history to sort of hint, yes, this guy has a long history of this. With Debbie, it's just like, yes, she's a con. We're not going to explain why, and we're not going to tell you, almost anything about it. Just go with she's a con. Although there is an opening scene when she gets out of prison, and the opening starts, there's a lot of things in this film that feel very much like the previous Ocean films. The opening starts very much like Ocean's 11, where she is at a parole hearing to see if she can get out of prison, and of course lying her teeth off in the same way Danny lied his teeth off of, no, I wouldn't go back to doing my old work. Yes, of course you would. I apologize if you hear noise in the background. In that same way, it's like, okay, but then she gets out of prison, and the opening scene actually kind of does hint that she at least can think of the things, even if she doesn't have the experience, because she manages to get some free expensive stuff and a free hotel room in some very clever ways that I was just like, wow, I almost want to give you a round of applause, even though that's totally illegal, but you did that well. Good for you. But beyond that, there's other things. Cate Blanchett's character, Lou, is the one who didn't go to prison, but also seems to be I wanted to say more rock and roll, but I'm not even quite sure how to deal with that. She's not portraying it this way, but she does feel, the character at least, a lot like a female Rusty. She's the sidekick to the Ocean character. She, at one point, even has the confrontation with Debbie over, are you focusing on this job or are you focusing on something else, in the same way Rusty confronted Danny in the first film about Tess, if you've seen that one. It feels, there was a lot of just like, okay, I get it. You're supposed to be the Rusty in this. Got it. Moving on. But beyond that, most of the other characters aren't as clear to be a sort of female version of Enter thing here. Awkwafina is obviously the pickpocket, but she and Linus, character-wise, aren't the same. Awkwafina feels more street smart, and Linus, when we first met him, felt more young and naive and having been a bit sheltered. Helena Bonham Carter, again, not having been in any con whatsoever, feels not very confident at all, whereas most of the people in the first Oceans, even when things didn't seem to be going right, at least felt like, well, I've been in this situation. But Helena Bonham Carter and Rihanna also really feel like they're kind of playing themselves. Helena Bonham Carter's character is a fashion designer who's down on her luck. Her previous collections haven't done well. She's millions of dollars in debt, and they've taken her passport because she's Irish. So she can't even leave and is possibly going to jail soon. And so that's how she's brought into the con. But she's got a bit of sort of wild hair, and she seems a bit eccentric, and it's sort of like, this is kind of how we view Helena Bonham Carter, just normally. Okay. And then Rihanna is sort of cool, and it really does feel, watching Rihanna, that it's like, this is Rihanna, the hacker edition, in the same way you have, like, it's Hacker Rihanna and Malibu Barbie. not Malibu Barbie, but that sort of thing. Like, you could have different versions of Rihanna and things. This is the hacker one. That's just who it is. Otherwise, it feels very much like Rihanna. If Rihanna really knew her way around a computer, and I'm not saying she doesn't, I have no idea, but it felt not too far from the way Rihanna appears in reality. The best character, I think, not the best character, I will say the best performance is Anne Hathaway, who plays Daphne Kluger, who is an actress who was hosting the Met Gala this year in this film, and is convinced to wear this very large, expensive diamond necklace that Debbie Ocean and her crew are planning to steal. And Anne Hathaway she seems to be having a good amount of fun. Her character's not a complete idiot, but is kind of dumb at times. And there's a moment where she's like freaking out about something and she seems kind of high maintenance, but does it so well. Like, it's kind of set up probably that, this could be a sequel at the end of this. And I kind of wish there would be, almost solely just for Anne Hathaway's character. Like, beyond even the main characters of Debbie and Lou, I'm just like, I want to see that chick actually in on a con. That would be very interesting to see, because she's so ridiculous in a number of ways, but smart in some ways too, and she's just playing it up. You could tell she probably had a good time in this role because of the things her character has to do and say. James Corden is also in this as an insurance investigator, I guess. And he evidently has a bit of a history with Debbie, not romantically, though there is a sort of previous love interest in this film, sort of similar to Tess, but not quite. James Corden evidently has a history just with Debbie's family. She at one point mentions, when his character is brought into the story, that he's busted her father twice, her brother once, or something like that. And so Lou's like, yeah, he's family, that they know each other and they know each other's, not ticks, but they get where each other's coming from position-wise, almost without the other one having to say anything. And so when Debbie shows up to talk to him, he's like, I'm not at all surprised you're here. Of course you are. Just give me back the diamond necklace, And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, yes, you do. Why are we playing this game? I know you know. I know you know. Like, let's go on. We both know this game already. And he's actually doing fun because he has to interview a number of people, and some of their responses are just like, did you understand the question? Or they're a little silly, and his responses to them are kind of fun. And it's just, it was fun watching him. And if there is a sequel, I want so much more Anne Hathaway, but I wouldn't mind if a bit of James Corden also shows up. Beyond that, though, it wasn't a bad movie per se. If you think of it, put it like you were trying to rank the other three Ocean's films with this one, it's definitely below 11 and 13, but maybe equal to or slightly above 12. And that's not because The Con is better, but rather just that I didn't really care for 12, especially with the love thing going on with Catherine Zeta-Jones' character, and then Julia Roberts playing a character playing Julia Roberts thing, and that just felt overdone. This feels, rather than overdone, not almost done enough. Like, it didn't go far enough. At the end of The Con, you do see, as the audience, there was something I wasn't in on, because that's always how these movies are. You think you know what the con is, and you kind of see the main con, but you don't see if there's another con going on, and there is almost always another con, but this one wasn't even hinted at, whereas in some of the other ones, it felt like I should have known that, and I just didn't see it. But beyond that, it just felt like the screenwriters didn't quite finish. Like, nothing, there's no untied storylines, but it's like the screenwriter's like, I'd like to put in more. I'd like to add something, but the draft's due now, so I've checked it for grammar. Let's go. Like, it was just like, you really couldn't do a bit more with the story, or actually kind of even explaining who these characters are, because I actually found myself not knowing their names at times. We get Rihanna's name because Debbie asked her, and Debbie knows Tammy, so we say her name. But like with Awkwafina's character, at one point they call her, it's like Constance. I was like, who the heck is Constance? Who are you talking about? Which one? I'm confused, and I kind of forgot what Helena Bonham Carter's character's name was. I know Anne's, but then I don't know the person that they used to make Anne jealous, and is that supposed to be the real person or a character? Because there are a number of cameos in this film. It's set at the Met Gala, so you do actually get a number of real celebrity cameos, to the point that at the end, during the credits, when they were running them down, I'm just like, oh, I missed like 3/4 of those. I did not notice those at all, and or I'm not even sure who that person is. Wow. But there's also a couple of Ocean's cast member cameos. And I kind of figured there would be, and I knew there was a rumor about a specific one who actually does not show up in this film, which I'm a little shocked by. But it was just sort of like, couldn't we have done this film without that? Because you're kind of setting it up like they couldn't have existed on their own if we didn't have some of the guys in. And it kind of feels that way. Like I'm all for films being led by females and having more female roles and having more substantial female roles. But I don't think it needs to be this thing of, well, let's just do this, but with girls, and that'll be just fine. This should have been, you know, a film that could stand on its own feet by itself without having to have these tie-ins. Like, just pick a different heist film and just call it Ocean's 8. And instead, it feels more like we feel we have to tie it in so much to the original Ocean's films that if you haven't seen the other Ocean's films, not that you'd miss anything from this, miss anything in this, I should say, but what would be the point even in watching this? Except that you want to see how the girls do the job. But it wouldn't be if this was a film by itself and there had never been the previous Ocean films. I don't know that this would be that enjoyable of a film. So, yes, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will be talking about another female remake, Ghostbusters. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Movie Podcast. Our second film today is Ghostbusters, the 2016 remake of the original film from the... Well, not the remake. Again, this is also sort of a reboot. It's got Ghostbusters, and there's 4 of them, and they're fighting ghosts, and there's one that's trying to destroy the city, as seems to always happen with the Ghostbusters and New York. But that's about it. There are a number of cameos from people from the first film, but they're not playing their old characters. They're playing different characters, so it's almost like that first version of the Ghostbusters never happened. Okay, not quite sure what world this is. Unlike Ocean's 8, which I was kind of interested in, just because I think partly it's a heist film, and depending on the way the heist film is set up in the trailers, I can kind of be into that. If it's a heist film that's not just, oh, we want to steal this thing and we have to, you know, get around the people who don't want us to steal this thing, But like with the Ocean's films, where it's not just the heist, but you, the audience, also has to be kind of pay attention to see if you can get what we're not going to tell you right away, to see if you get the sort of secret thing going on. So I was kind of excited for Ocean's 8. When Ghostbusters came out, I was not excited for it. I am not a big fan of reboots, whatever, especially if it's like something that's very easily in my lifetime. I was not actually alive when the first two Ghostbusters came out, but it just feels, and the first one especially, was actually a well enough made film that I'm like, why are you touching that? Leave it alone. That is an 80s movie, and I'm actually not a big fan of most 80s movies, but that is an 80s movie I actually like. Don't touch it. Why do we need to remake everything? And it really does feel that way, like for many years now. Everything has to be either a remake or a reboot or a sequel, and I'm a little annoyed by it. So going into this film, I was just like, okay. And like, even more so than Ocean's 8, which felt it needed to sort of tie back into the original Ocean's things, or else you wouldn't know it's an Ocean's film or something. This Ghostbusters felt very much not even just tying into the original film, but like they had to meet certain parts of the original film, almost as if they were sort of going through with a checklist and making sure they checked everything off. So, you know, like wacky science genius who invents things that can catch ghosts. Check. Token black character. Check. Mayor who just wants to be popular and ends up inadvertently standing in the Ghostbusters' way because his staff people kind of suck. Check. Ridiculous secretary. Big villain who becomes huge. Slimer. Check, 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 check. Like, it was just like, okay, I get it. That's supposed to be that from the original film, and that's supposed to be that from the second film, and it just felt so like I literally seen this before, that almost nothing felt original about this film, even though they have slightly changed the story. So we're in the first one, you know, the characters, save for Ernie Hudson's character, were scientists who were sort of kicked out of their university. In this one, the main character, Erin, is up for tenure, but in her history, she wrote a book on ghosts with her old friend Abby, who was played by Melissa McCarthy. And now Abby has put that book up on the internet, even though she said she wouldn't. And people are finding it, and that could threaten Erin's tenure. And we later find out it does. But she goes to confront Abby and meets, I cannot even remember Kate McKinnon's character's name, whole name. They keep calling her Holes at times because it's part of her last name. And I'll just call her Holes because it was shorter in the one I heard more. She and Holes are at looks like a rundown high school, almost being kicked out of themselves. And Erin and Abby have this frosty history and they don't want to do anything. But Erin has been asked by a person who found this book to come to a mansion that he believes there was a ghost at. And she goes to confront Abby about it and mentions this is how she knows that the book is up, because someone asked her about it. And Abby's like, okay, I'll take it down if you take me to this place, because that sounds like a real ghost. And they go and do see a real ghost and end up setting the Ghostbusters up. Even though they don't originally call it the Ghostbusters, they have some really long, convoluted scientific name, but it ends up being called the Ghostbusters. And like the Ernie Hudson character, Leslie Jones in this is the outsider. So she works at the MTA, the transit authority or whatever, in the subway, and she ends up seeing something strange and sees a ghost and goes to the Ghostbusters to deal with it, and ends up sort of joining them because she thinks it's like a cool club and would be fun to deal with. That's kind of explained. Like, that's the one thing I liked about it, was it's explained because she works for the MTA and the ghosts keep sliming them for some reason. Hey, there are these coveralls that MTA workers use. We should use those. That's where we get the coveralls from. Or like Leslie Jones's uncle runs a funeral house. So, that's where we get the car from, because he let us borrow his hearse. Like, the fact that they actually went to try and explain those, I quite like. But even then, it was like, we've got to have tie-ins to the original film. So, like, you see the original Ghostbusters building, the firehouse. You also see the original Ghostbusters logo. At one point, it's like we have to keep tying in and sort of, doing winks at the audience of, yeah, see, we're about that too. But it's like, I know you are. You've got the original name, and you do actually at one point have the original theme song, but then you have a remix version of the theme song that you use more. Like, I don't need every single reminder of the original Ghostbusters. It only takes away from this film and reminds me how much I prefer the original better. And I'm actually really surprised that they managed to get all the cameos that they did get in this film, because I'm just like, did you read this? Did you know this was going to be this way, or did you just agree without, like, this film, it's not, it's just sigh. It really is. And Chris Hemsworth is in this as the secretary, their secretary for their Ghostbusters Institute, what have you. And he is playing what may literally be like the dumbest Australian ever. And it's not like he's particularly being a dumb Australian. He just happens to actually have the accent, so we can tell that he is from Australia. But he is so dumb in so many ways that it's just like, why? It's not even really understandable why he gets hired, except that evidently no one else wanted the job. And Kristen Wiig's character just kind of stares at him, which fine, I get. Yes, Chris Hemsworth is a good-looking man, and at one point they're like, well, we have to go get Kevin. When the whole ghost thing is happening, we have to go get Kevin because we're never going to find another one that pretty. And I'm just like, yeah, okay. I don't know why you hired him to begin with, but yeah, good-looking guy, okay. But like he doesn't quite know how to use the phones. He doesn't answer them properly or at all, and then he doesn't take messages well or tell them when someone has arrived to see them. Or there's one point where he makes Melissa McCarthy a coffee, and she asks, did you remember to put sugar in it this time? To which his response naturally is, oh, well, let me sip it to see. But then he like immediately it back into the cup because he's like, oh, I hate coffee. And yeah, there's sugar in it. And then hands it to her. Like, that's the natural thing to do. And it's just like, no, why? No, why are you? No, okay, pass. And like watching the trailers, I wasn't interested in the film, but I was kind of interested in Kate McKinnon's character just because she looked like she was, I won't say crazy, a little wacky and not fully understanding social convention and or just deciding the heck with social convention. I don't care. She kind of looked like she would be a fun character, but in this film, it's just like, you were really just trying to do every single sort of weird thing you could think you could do, but it's not that funny. And I'm actually a bit more interested in Leslie Jones's character, who, looking at the trailers, I didn't really want to see at all. So it's just like, so my expectations for character-wise were not met. My expectations for movie-wise feel kind of vindicated because it's not that great a movie. And even beyond the original Ghostbusters, this one leaves me with some really strange questions of like, even though you've got this person who kind of explains the science, similar to Egon, but even more so, what exactly works here with the ghost? I'm still confused. What are the rules of Ghost World? Because at one point during the big main battle, you get a ghost who like throws a ghost axe, because you take things with you when you die or something, throws a ghost axe at one of the Ghostbusters and ends up missing and hits another ghost who reacts like, oh, you've just really hit me. I'm like, but you're dead. Does that really affect you? You're already dead. And there's not the main ghost, but like a big ghost in this who looks like a stilt walker from a circus. And I think those are actually his legs, but I'm just like, what are you supposed to be? Like, what were you in real life that you're this now? And there are ghost balloons, there are ghost balloons, but you can pop them by physical. What works and what doesn't work in this film? I'm confused, and you're not funny enough to keep me from that confusion. What the heck? So they kind of try and set it up at the end. There's sort of credit sting scenes, whatever have you. They kind of try and set it up maybe for a sequel. The way they set it up seems to be referencing like, oh yes, we'd be remaking another Ghostbusters films with every single thing we have to wink at you about, so you know we're from that film series. I hope they don't. I did not like this film, and this is why I don't want you to remake, reboot everything. This wasn't that great. The first one was pretty awesome. Why did you feel the need to sort of ruin my memories of that first one if you're not going to be able to top it? So I actually kind of like, Sarah and I talked about this on a previous episode. I like Melissa McCarthy. I loved her as Suki, but I just have not really liked any of her post-Suki things, even though I want her to do well. I think Kate McKinnon can be quite funny on Saturday Night Live, but I haven't seen too many films of hers either. Leslie Jones, I wanted more for her in this film, and she's slightly better. Her character, at least, is treated a bit better than I feel Ernie Hudson's character was treated in the first two films, in that he just felt very token of, oh yes, we're racially diverse, we've got a black character who we're not going to give too much to do except say that street smart thing and then not do too much again. Leslie Jones feels a bit better, but not majorly better. She still feels, that character still feels like a side thought, like an afterthought, and I wanted more for her character in the film, and I want more for her in real life, and so I just kind of wish all the actresses better films, and also stop doing remakes. But that's not going to happen, so of course I apologize if I went on a bit of a anti-remake reboot rant. I will try not to do that in the future, because I know we will, of course, just be talking about more remakes and reboots in the future. So I will try to be more up and positive on it next time. But anyways, we're going to end for today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.